Hugh, thank you very much indeed, and good evening, everyone. You have no idea how overwhelming and humbling it is when a group of your friends meet behind a closed door and emerge with a telephone call to ask you to be here, and not just to be here, but to have the awesome privilege of just providing a little bit of an inspirational moment around a great mission. So I stand before you with a certain degree of fear and trepidation, but also a great deal of humility and joy to be able to do that. Well, 2 weeks ago today, I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. You know you're in Bible Belt territory when you drive out of the airport and you are on the Billy Graham Parkway. And I was there for a conference on biblical justice. Some would say a conference on biblical justice in Charlotte is a bit of an oxymoron, but at least it was unusual. There was a question which was asked of me. Somebody said, "What's the state of the church in the UK and London in particular?" It's a question I've heard before. I've heard it several times. I tend to hear it in parts of the world, like Africa, or extremely religious communities like America, or in Asia. Anywhere there is huge revival and a lot going on, people ask the question, and there is an undertone behind the question. The question really means, I hear the church in the UK, and London in particular, has gone to pot, which isn't necessarily a drug, but it means it's in bad shape. And I love that question. I think the question is normally followed by something like, we are really praying to God that God will revive London and revive the UK. And I'm normally very grateful for the sentiment and the prayer because, you know, we need all the prayers we can get. But I often ask them, well, so what does revival look like to you then? Is my usual follow-up question. And I don't know what your view of revival is. Let me tell you mine. You may or may not have heard it from me before. The best way I can describe revival is to reflect on an event which happened to me a few years ago when I was at this small Christian conference called Spring Harvest. I was walking across the open area, and a guy came up to me and he said, "Joel," he said, "do you remember me?" And I said, no. Sorry. He said, "Well, you were on tour, you came to my church, I was sick, and you prayed for me." And I thought, I know where this story is going. I can see it in Harvest News. Joel prays for sick man gets healed. And he finished what he was saying, and he said, "And I had to go to the hospital." And I thought, win some, lose some. And then I saw him again about 2 days later. This time he had a cohort from his local church with him. And he brought them to me and introduced them to me. And he said, "This is Joel. I was sick, and Joel came to my local church and prayed for me, and I had to go to the hospital." And they all fell about laughing. Very bad for the ego. So I said, "Look, mate, you were sick. I prayed for you and you went to the hospital. Can you imagine what would have happened had I not prayed? You would be dead." I think revival is a bit like that. It's never a panacea. It is God pulling back the grit and the grime of human failure and fallenness, and for brief moments allowing heaven to descend on the tarmac of our lives and relationships and our politics and our economics, and saying this is what a city could look like. Well, if you want to talk about revival, and I won't be long, I promise you, there is, of course, no better place to go than the book of Acts. There's a black bishop who always described Acts as active Christians terrorizing Satan. Wonderful, wonderful little acronym if you have a problem remembering Acts. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. And Philip went down to a city in Samaria and proclaimed the Messiah there. This is Acts 8, and that was verse 4 and 5. And when the crowds heard Philip, by the way, this is Philip the deacon, not Philip the apostle, and saw the signs he performed, they all paid close attention to what he said. For with shrieks, impure spirits came out of many, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. And there was great joy in the city. So this is the trademark, I think, of what we're about in Crossing London. We want revival in London. Here's how it looked. Philip goes to a city in Samaria. That's interesting. The city is not important. The location, the geography, the culture, the unfamiliarity is. This is a Jewish guy coming out of the church in the heart of Jerusalem, crossing cultural barriers. Are we in revival? Well, I have this sneaky feeling that London may already be on what I describe as revival in slow burn. You see, when I left Jamaica, Stephen, in 1960, I was age 8 in 1960. And at the age of 8, the word which resonated in my head was this: don't go to England, because if you do, you will backslide, because England is a, and I quote, a spiritual graveyard. Could you have convinced me then that in due time in the capital city, 53% of Christians would be crossing cultural barriers to build a Christian presence in the capital? I would have said no. These were the days when it may have been difficult, if you were a black or Asian person, to find residence in some of our historic churches. You're not a decent historic church now if you haven't got a black or an Asian person in your congregation. God has brought to us in the capital, with 250 languages, a multiplicity of Christians who have come as bulwarks to build up God's work in the capital. God is already at work. And the church has crossed cultural barriers. We have a black one in New York. We had one leading the Evangelical Alliance. They are leading us in music and worship. They are chaplains to the Queen and the House of Commons. Asian, Hispanic Christians who we have yet to discover are a part of what God is already doing in the capital. Those of us who were a long way away in the Commonwealth have come home. Ladies and gentlemen, the Empire Strikes Back. So Philip is in Samaria. And what does he do? He preaches the word. So I say to people when they ask me what's happening to the church in England, and in London in particular, isn't it being riddled with discussions about homosexuality and women bishop and people leaving churches and churches being turned into mosques and bingo halls and so on? Some of that is happening, but let me tell you, the word of God is still being preached. From this city, Alpha, from this city, Christianity explored. In prisons, in care homes, men and women remain diligent to the Word of God. We believe in transformation. Crossing London will be about transformation. But Christians do not believe in transformation with a heart bypass. The Word of God is about changing lives, changing hearts, changing mindsets, changing cultural attitudes. And that's the business of Crossing London. I'm excited by it. And then this deacon performed signs and wonders. I think that's important. You know what signs and wonders and healings were about? People who were paralyzed and lame, walking. It wasn't just about God saying, hey, look what I can do. Up you get. Consider the social and economic context of the first century. Every miracle of healing, a blind eye opened, a lame person walking, a paralytic mobile again, was a total act of transformation of body and soul and spirit. Because if you were a cripple, you couldn't work. If you were paralyzed, you were not economically viable. If you were blind, you were dependent on somebody else. If you were a leper, you were ostracized from community life. Every act of miraculous transformation was an act of social and community transformation. That is the power of the gospel. And I'm excited as I look across London. Is London in revival? I think God is doing something. I could not have imagined in 1960 the churches reaching out to prisons, the food banks, street pastors with 11,000 trained street pastors in London alone. Incredible ministries like Patrick Reagan's XLP, mentoring young people across the capital. He told me of a story of a young woman, Grace, who was such a nuisance at school that they expelled her several times. This was going to be her last time. They handed her over to XLP for nurturing, and within 9 months, they were asking her to be school captain. That is the power of the gospel. And revival crosses frontiers. Revival preaches the word. Revival changes lives. I don't think of Crossing London as a campaign or a mission, even. I think of it as a part of what God is doing and has been doing for many years. 1953, Haringey Stadium is emblazoned in our corporate consciousness when Billy came to town. God was doing something in the nation and in the capital. He was doing it again in Mission London. And some of us had the privilege, you just heard, of being involved in that. When Mission London closed, Hugh and I and many others were responsible for trying to catalyze Christian coordination in prayer and social involvement. It's a part of what God has been doing. Soul in the City is a part of what God has been doing in unveiling his power in the capital. Crossing London is another part of that great unfolding of God's care for the city. Well, I can say this because I'm not a pastor. I hope our churches have more people attending as a result of Crossing London. But frankly, I don't really care. I'm not even sure if God cares that much. What I think he cares about is this: will there be great joy in the city? It's interesting, very often the Bible talks about many coming to faith and the word of God multiplying and many believers being added. This time it doesn't, curiously. It just says that the city was filled with joy. What does revival look like? Revival may look like happy, clappy Christians in a big building with a television ministry, but it's more likely to look like a city experiencing joy. And now, Billy isn't here, and Mission to London, as we've known it, has happened, and Soul in the City has happened, and other events have come along to contribute to this move of God in our capital. But the God of Elijah is with us. The God of Jacob is with us. Paul's God is with us. Peter's God is with us. Philip's God is with us. And as we cross London, crossing cultures, proclaiming the word, seeing lives changed, may there be great joy in the city.